Chapter 1. It was early October when I drove east toward the mountains outside Seattle with tainted emeralds on my mind. The autumn sun gilded birch leaves, and the blue sky appeared polished by a crisp and steady wind. But the green in the trees stole the show. Armies of cedar and fir and hemlock marched up the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, long limbs glowing with a peculiar shade of green I'd seen only once before, when a 6-carat emerald rolled across a stainless steel examination tray in the FBI's materials analysis lab. That gem's green facets glowed with a hue so verdant, so luscious, it whispered sibilant promises in the ears of greedy men. Just before the town of Issaquah, I turned south off Interstate 90 and followed Sunset Way to the western side of Cougar Mountain. My car windows were open and the air smelled of pine needles and dry curling leaves and iron-rich soil warmed by the sun. This was supposed to be a routine visit, a courtesy call by the FBI for the local PD. But I've learned not to judge anything by appearance. That gorgeous emerald in the FBI lab cost 3 men their lives. I parked in a small gravel lot on the right side of the road and walked over to a gray Crown Vic idling beside a police cruiser, the driver's windows lined up with each other. When I knocked on the Crown Vic's window, the glass lowered 6 inches. I leaned down. "Detective Markle?" "Yes." He raised his eyebrows. "I'm Raleigh Harmon, FBI." He blinked, then squinted as though the sun hurt his eyes. "Oh, I was expecting... When Jack Stevenson said your name, I thought..." "Yes, sir. I understand." 2 weeks ago, the FBI transferred me to Seattle from Richmond, Virginia. And although Southern women often carried family names forward as first names, here in the Northwest, people kept assuming Raleigh meant I was a man. "Not that there's a problem," the detective added. He had driven 6 feet forward, far enough to open his door and climb out. The state trooper left his car where it was, walking over to where I stood. "This is Trooper Ron Lowell," the detective said. "He's with the Washington State Patrol." The trooper's blue uniform had vertical creases that looked as though the clothes were ironed on his body. A white braid circled the brim of his felt hat. Trooper Lowell smiled, dipping the hat toward me. "Ma'am," he said, "nice to meet you." My heart squeezed with homesickness, for a place where all men had manners like his. Behind us, a car door slammed and a small woman walked toward us. She looked like an elf purged from a fairy tale. Her long red hair leaped over her shoulders in ropes of lava, and her enormous black boots scuffed across the loose gravel shards, creating a sound like belligerent applause. This is Fern Valley," the detective said. "She works with Issaquah Parks Department. Fern, this is Special Agent Raleigh Harmon with the FBI." Fern Valley's pinched expression silenced every question about her name. The detective continued. "The vehicle in question belongs to one Courtney Van Alston. She lives in Kirkland. We called the residence. A roommate answered. She hasn't seen the girl since Sunday." It was Tuesday, 2 days later, and the vehicle in question was an army green Land Rover parked perpendicular to a cedar log boom that ran the circumference of the gravel parking lot. Behind the log boom, a bulletin board was mounted on plywood and displayed a map of hiking trails stretching across Cougar Mountain. A ring of maple, oak, and aspen trees dropped dying leaves on the Land Rover, smothering the windshield with a flat conglomerate of burnt oranges and bruised reds. "Who found the vehicle?" I asked. When no one answered, I asked again. Fern Valley rolled her big blue eyes. "Sunday afternoons I clean the trailhead," she said. "That doesn't answer my question." She sighed, a sound like steam escaping a tight seal. "I come out here Sundays to clean the trailhead, okay? That's when I saw a car. I came back Monday, it was still here, so I called the cops. They said wait another day. I came back this morning, it's still here. I've been waiting for you to show up. Get this thing out of here, okay?" I glanced at Detective Markle. He wore an expression that compressed his emotions into the diplomatic mask of law enforcement. "We're exercising due caution," he explained. "We still haven't established what—" "I'm tired of people treating the mountains like some football stadium," Fern Valley interrupted. You know how many beer cans and condoms I pick up out here? It's sickening. Now we're supposed to run some park and ride? Nobody respects the land. Nobody. Detective Markle waited, attempting to ensure the rant was over. For now. Then he turned to me. We sometimes get people going on overnighters, hike all day, camp the night, drive home the next morning. But this particular trailhead isn't known for overnighters. It's more of a quick run. Most campers drive over to Tiger Mountain. When you say, Ron? Trooper Lowell had his thumbs hooked into the wide black leather belt holding his holstered gun, and a radio with a cord running to the mic clipped on his left shoulder. He reached up, brushing away a gnat, shifting his stance. The black shoes gleamed with an obsidian polish. Ma'am, we run plates on every vehicle that's left on park grounds for more than 24 hours, he said. Sometimes we get folks hiking to the trail's end, like Detective Markle said, but it's taking longer than they expected. Or maybe they get drunk and a friend takes the keys. Maybe the vehicle's out of gas. We hear 'em all. And if the car is left for more than 24 hours? I asked. We tow it. That's after we run the plates, of course. See if it's stolen or any outstandings exist in the way of warrants. Issaquah PD handles the tow. I glanced at the detective. His black hair was greased, combed, riding waves to the back of his head. But you didn't tow this car, I said. Well, no. Because? Because it's not so cut and dried, the detective said. After we phoned the roommate, we called the girl's parents. The title lists them as the vehicle's owners. The mother said she hasn't heard from the girl since Sunday. She begged us to launch a search. We ran the dog out here yesterday, but he went around in circles. Up the trail just a ways, then circled back to the parking lot. The father came out, watching the whole thing. He was pretty upset, you can imagine. When the dog came up with nothing, we decided to call you guys for some forensics. You know, just in case. See? Fern Valley hissed. If I didn't say something, they would have just let this thing sit here leaking oil into the land. Do you have any idea what motor oil does to the ecosystem? To the streams? The salmon? Like the salmon don't have enough problems? I thanked Fern Valley for her time, gave her my card, and told her she could leave now. She spun, red hair scything the air, and stomped back to the white pickup parked at the edge of the gravel. The truck door read, Issaquah Parks Department. I watched the truck pull onto Sunset Way, the tailpipe belching noxious clouds of exhaust. The trooper, on the other hand, received my genuine smile and a business card with all my FBI contact numbers, including my cell number. But his reaction was more wounded than Fern's. He suddenly looked childlike, the most athletic boy dismissed early from the big game. There was no polite way to explain that evidence collection had a better chance of withstanding cross-examinations in court if only essential personnel were involved. Nobody wanted to be told they were inessential, particularly in law enforcement. You don't want me to stick around? He said. I can help. Really. Thank you, Officer Lowell. We appreciate your time. We'll be in touch. Ma'am, I'm happy to help. Yes, thank you. We'll be in touch. His brown eyes roamed my face, searching for some motive. Finally, he tipped the lapis blue hat, and his cruiser made a wide U-turn through the parking lot, disappearing down the two-lane road lined by trees with flaming leaves. I walked to my car, popped the trunk. The detective followed. Did you notify the media? I asked. The family wants to keep this very low-key, he said. No media. That won't help you find her. What I told them, but they won't listen. The mother said publicity will only make her circumstances worse. What circumstances is she talking about? They think she was kidnapped. Pardon? For money, he said. They're wealthy, like really, really wealthy. They talk about kidnapping like nothing else could have happened. We told them it would still help if we went public, but they're adamant. All the time begging us to find her with no media involved. He sighed. Fingerprints? I asked. Just hers, on the steering wheel, door handles, stereo, the usual. Before I headed out this morning, my new colleague, Special Agent Jack Stevenson, had warned me that the Issaquah PD would be skittish about disappearances like this. Several years earlier, a local family sued the police department, alleging detectives hadn't responded diligently when their teenage daughter went missing. A chronic runaway with a known drug problem, the girl's case had received standard procedure from overworked and understaffed detectives. But when she surfaced as the second victim in a serial killing that stretched across Seattle's east side, the subsequent lawsuit raked millions from city coffers and lined the pockets of trial attorneys. These days, even Seattle's smallest police departments called in the FBI for technical backup, asking for the kind of tests and procedures that might dissuade lawyers from trial. And whenever possible, they did what parents asked. I snapped on latex gloves and squeezed my hand into the wheel well, carefully removing the soil nestled inside. The small grains crumbled between my fingers, a dirt dried by an August drought and similarly rainless September. I deposited the sample into a sterile cotton bag, marking the paper bag with a Sharpie, pulling the drawstring tight. I ran an index finger across the tire treads. They were new tires, still holding extraneous molded rubber pieces from the factory. I found a slug of soil inside one of the treads and placed that in another cotton bag. Then I glanced around the parking lot. The shards of gray granite were too large and loose for wheel impressions. Even if the tires had left an impression, the trooper drove directly behind the rover, obliterating any trace. Kneeling down and opening my work bag, I took out a canister of fingerprint powder, 1 jar of Vaseline, and about 20 sheets of white cardstock paper. "Please pop the front doors," I said. The detective shimmied a flat metal Slim Jim between the door's frame and window, popping the lock. At the back of the car, I smeared Vaseline across the rear tires, coating the treads until they glistened, then laid the cardstock on the gravel directly behind each wheel. Walking to the front of the car, where the doors were open, I could smell sun-soaked leather and a vanilla air freshener so heavy it powdered my tongue like talc. "On the count of 3, I said, "push it back." We leaned into the doorframe from opposite sides, pushing against the rover until the rear wheels rolled across the paper with a crunching sound. "Okay, that's good," I said. I picked up the paper from under the car. The bottom sheets had torn against the rocks, but I needed only the top. With the small box of fingerprint powder, I gently blew magnetic fragments across the Vaseline. The black tread marks swept into view. "Neat trick," the detective said. "It looks like the car drove over the paper." I nodded, greasing the front tires, laying more paper on the gravel before we pushed the rover forward into the log boom. I slipped all 4 tread impressions between separate vellum sheets and took photographs of each tire with a digital camera. "Do we really need all 4 tires?" the detective asked, frowning. "No offense meant." "None taken. Every shoe leaves a different print, depending on the manufacturer and wear. It's the same with tires." He didn't look convinced. "We once had a case where a suspect's vehicle had 4 different tires, all different makes. Each tire left a completely different tread mark at the scene. Because we had a record for each, when prosecutors showed the statistical anomaly, it sealed the verdict. You want legal protection? That's what I'm offering." He nodded, but worry knotted his forehead. The FBI billed the local police departments for time, material, and expenses, and small-town PDs were already strapped financially. The detective would have to defend every forensic procedure. "I won't run any tests until I hear back from you," I said. "The soil analysis is the most expensive. Save that for last, if y'all even need it." "Y'all?" "You and your department." "Where are you from?" "Virginia." "That explains you calling me sir. How long you been out here?" "About 2 weeks." "You enjoying our Indian summer?" "It's beautiful." He lifted his head, the black hair sparkling with illumination, bright coal dust riding a crystal stream. "Yep, we've got some good weather. But when it starts raining, let me know what you think." I shrugged. "It rains in Virginia." "Sure it does. But do you feel like you've been in the shower for 6 months? I snapped off my gloves, told him to call if there was anything else, and drove back to the office with the windows down. My assigned government ride was a 1997 Buick Skylark. At first glance, it looked dark blue, but in the bright sun it revealed a peculiar shade of purple, a color that provoked my colleagues to dub it the Barney Mobile, after the fake dinosaur on children's television. The color didn't bother me as much as the smell that came from the back seat, a rank stench of vomit that rose like an apparition, testifying to the fear and panic in every collared criminal who ever puked back there. As if that wasn't enough, the car's engine knocked too, a sound like spare parts coming loose under the hood. I checked. I couldn't find anything. But for my foreseeable future, this was my car, and the Seattle field office was home base, courtesy of a disciplinary transfer that was requested by my former supervisor in Richmond. Disciplinary transfers were one way the Bureau dissuaded agents from disagreeing with orders, even when the order seemed wrong. Scratch that, especially when the order seemed wrong. Now my former supervisor claimed I had placed myself in grave danger unnecessarily, that I continued to work the case even after she'd suspended me. The case closed with spectacular effects for the Bureau, the feds looking like heroes, but my supervisor still thought I needed punishment. To her disappointment, Alaska didn't have an opening. She chose the next farthest office from Richmond. Now I drove down Madison Street, heading toward Seattle's waterfront, descending the steep grade that rolled across downtown in an east-west pattern. Although the Bureau's field office perched atop Spring Street in a 10-story building with an underground garage, my assigned parking spot sat 15 blocks away on a sliver of leased land above the barnacle-covered piers that buttressed the waterfront. I left the windows cracked, locked my car, and loaded up my gear. Laptop, handheld radio, cell phone, gym bag for a lunchtime workout that never happened, and my briefcase. Then I slipped on a blazer that covered the Glock 22 holstered to my belt. In the distance, a ferry boat horned the air. The first 7 blocks weren't so bad. They ran parallel to Puget Sound, but the second half pitched near 40 degrees. The sun burned on my back. My hands stung from 20 pounds of gear, and my thighs ached so badly that when I reached the corner of James and Spring Street, my hello to Mike at the front desk was nothing more than a hoarse whisper. I rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, wiping sweat from my forehead. When the doors parted, a gruff voice barked my name. "Harmon!" Alan McLeod, my new supervisor. I walked down the main corridor of the Violent Crimes Unit, my gym bag bouncing off my right leg. Alan McLeod approached from the opposite side of the room, lumbering through a maze of cubicles with towering stacks of paper until he reached my desk. He rested one large hand on the column of cardboard boxes with case numbers scrawled across their sides. I still hadn't unpacked. "Where have you been?" he asked. A big man, he wore starched white shirts that looked pilfered from the closets of his supervisors. The red suspenders were flecked with oily stains. "Jack sent me out to Issaquah. They wanted legal backup on a missing." I explained that we'd taken tire impressions and soil samples. "See if Jack needs anything else," he said, "and check with me end of day." "Yes, sir." He paused, about to say something, then walked away. I set my laptop and briefcase on my desk, rubbing a sweaty palm creased by the nylon straps. My desk phone blinked with unanswered messages. I punched in my numbered code for voicemail, writing down the information, and halfway through the second message, Jack Stevenson walked over and rested a muscular haunch on the edge of my desk. "How'd it go, Harmon?" I raised an index finger, indicating that I was still writing. He reached down, depressing the plastic triangle in the phone bed, severing the message. "I asked you a question," he said. Setting down the receiver as if it were made of glass, I described my visit to Issaquah. Jack's azure eyes were set close, and they gave his face the focused intensity of a German shepherd. When he asked me to recount the evidence collection procedure again, I said, "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said. "File it." "Pardon?" "Send that thing down with the Titanic. It's another nowhere case, but that's just my opinion," he added. "You might choose to do something different. But I know you can handle the consequences." "What are you saying, Jack?" He stood up. "I need to get you to the courthouse." "You just said file this." "You need to pick up my paperwork," he said. "Pronto." I counted to 5. "I've got an interview scheduled in half an hour. McLeod wants a background check on a federal applicant." "Tell the clerk down at the courthouse that I want certified copies of all prior convictions on a guy named Bookman Landau," he continued as though I'd said nothing. "Case goes to trial Thursday. Keep that day open. I need an assist." He adjusted his blue jeans. They groped his muscular legs. "Oh, and another thing, Harmon." I swiveled the chair, picking up the telephone, punching in my code again. It was only fair. He wasn't explaining why the Van Alstyne case was a dead end. I didn't need to listen. He stood behind me for several moments, then walked away. When I glanced down the aisle, watching his cowboy swagger and lug-soled shoes, he suddenly turned around and raised his voice, making sure it crossed the cluttered room. "Harmon, I need those documents now, so quit pouting and get over to the clerk's office." From the corner of my eye, I saw my superior lift his head. The phone stayed nestled between my shoulder and ear, and I wrote down all 8 messages, documenting the information before logging onto the computer and checking email. I replied to one message from a former colleague in the FBI's mineralogy lab in Washington, D.C., and ignored the Bureau's blanket request for agents willing to move to Iraq and investigate stolen antiquities. 20 minutes later, I walked down the corridor to the squad's conference room and purchased a can of Coca-Cola and 2 bags of potato chips from the vending machine. Between bites, I returned 2 phone calls. 49 minutes later, I walked outside, heading toward the courthouse on Jack's orders. The sun was still shining, and the west side of the city's skyscrapers reflected the view of Puget Sound. The glass panels made it look like the ferry boats were navigating vertical reaches, cruising up an ocean of concrete, sailing for the bright and distant sun.